Thabo, a very good afternoon. Let's start with the basics. Many South Africans really feel that they simply don't have anything left to save. And, we're wondering if saving is still possible for the average household right now, or is it a luxury that only the few can afford? Talk to us about the state of personal saving in our country.
Thanks, Lizelle, and thanks for the opportunity. Most definitely, if you listen to the sentiment that is expressed by most South Africans, they're finding it tough to go. The state of the economy is not necessarily favorable to them, according to at least the sentiments that they expressed. Whether is the rising cost of living or stagnant income levels, both of which contribute, unfortunately, negative in terms of the sentiments to save and the ability to save. So certainly, from the sentiment point of view, you get a sense that South Africans are massively under pressure economically, and you can't help but empathize with the South Africans in terms of how they feel at the moment. And yes, it does have an impact on their ability, at least their ability to save. And quite frankly, the views expressed, particularly by those that were interviewed, push towards that, to say they're finding it hard to save, and one could understand why.
Yeah, well, okay, thank you for those opening remarks. I mean, if we're looking at micro dynamics and the macro dynamics, I mean, beyond inflation and transport costs, even just energy tariffs, there's the macro dynamics of a shifting geopolitical landscape, even long-term effects of climate change as well. And, a plethora of other issues that are coming to the fore, COVID-19 recovery as well. We're seeing a growing number of people using payment systems to buy food and daily essentials. It's happening in installments. There's food credit as well. I mean, this is indicative of a cash flow that really is tight. And I wonder how you'd weigh in on, incorporating some of those, factors, micro and macro, but the risks as well in terms of what people are then doing to rely on these systems a bit too frequently. If I throw in the aspect of mashonisas or loan sharks, I mean, we've also seen incidences on that front. And so if you obtain finance through those means, what are the dangers on that front?
Yeah, and most certainly, Lizelle, and one of the phenomena that we're starting to pick up also is gambling. To augment the income, at least, there's the sentiment that we're starting to pick up. And yes, South Africans are looking at it and saying, look, I can't afford. To keep on their daily living, yes, they resort to sometimes not so sustainable means, such as relying on debt to cover their daily expenses. We're seeing also a depleting nature of savings. People are no longer saving as much as they would want to save. And one of the phenomena that we're also picking up is when people are starting to withdraw from their savings, the existing savings, just to cover their daily expenses. Two-pot is an example of those, where people are starting to dip into their pension funds just to access funds for daily living. Yes, whether it's because of micro aspects or macro aspects that in many an instance are not within the immediate grasp of an ordinary South African. The fact of the matter is, whatever is happening, whether it's at a geopolitical level or even at a local level, does have an impact on the pockets of ordinary South Africans. The question is, what do we do there as ordinary South Africans, given the state of the economy at the moment, given the high levels of inflation, whether it's food inflation, whether it's energy inflation, whichever way that you look at it, it does have an impact on the pockets of South Africans. And the question is, how do we then mitigate or deal with the issues of savings?
Yeah, and there are still more questions and answers. Thank you for also speaking to the point about the phenomenon of gambling, because obviously there are, debates about the value chain and what it contributes on that front, even tax, but obviously the societal issues at large. A big concern, to your point as well, about the pensions, people withdrawing from that earlier on, given the two-part system, and it offers a short-term solution, but obviously the future of financial health in the long term has been scrutinized now at this point. What are the practical steps that people should be taking? What are those small daily changes? Skipping, take away coffee, and that's for the privilege, obviously. Perhaps looking at packing lunch, growing your own food. How do some of these measures, attempt to make a difference?
And certainly, that's some of the aspects that we need to consider. Things like traveling, those that are privileged to travel to work can make arrangements such as at least starting an hour or so later so that you avoid peak traffic, which can have an impact on the consumption, for instance, of your petrol, etc. And if there's other alternatives such as taking lunch, instead of buying at the canteens and those kind of things, we certainly need a new way of looking at how we manage our personal finances. But we need to step back also and just take it to the basics, live within our means. The little that we have, try to stretch the rent as much as we possibly can. Instead of conspicuous consumptions that we are known for as South Africans, perhaps it's time that we tighten up a little bit and to a large extent, try to live as much as we possibly can within our plans, within our means, within our budgets, so that we avoid unnecessary and unsustainable ways of spending. For instance, spending on debt to cover your daily living might not necessarily be sustainable over a long period. Including depleting your current savings into your pension funds is not necessarily going to be sustainable over a longer period. So perhaps we need to step back and say, what are the things that we actually need to survive, and be able to distinguish between things that we can do without and things that we absolutely need to survive on a daily basis. And I know that it might be speaking from a point of privilege to say, but people are really stressed. But we then need to look at other elements, such as we mentioned earlier, growing our own vegetables, seeing if there's any talents that we have to at least dip into those to increase our earnings potential. So instead of relying on single earnings, look at how else can we generate our income such that we are able to match our expenses. But definitely
Thabo,
look at alternative ways.
Yeah. And I mean, context is obviously important in a South African context. And I wonder, when we're looking at the role of National Treasury, what they're promoting in terms of savings incentives. Talk to us about what you're witnessing on that front. Tax-free, savings accounts, stokvel initiatives as well, protections on that front. What more could be done from National Treasury at this point, given the realities?
I wish Lizella could speak on their behalf, but the observations on the ground is, yes, definitely people are under pressure and they're looking at alternatives, such as those that you've mentioned, which is tax-free savings account. But for you to even use the tax-free savings account, you need to have an extra buck or two in order to put that put into the savings. I'm not going to say it's out of a lack of intent from the National Treasury or anybody like that. But we certainly, from a consumer point of view, we need to start looking at ourselves and say, what are the things that we need to be looking at as consumers? What are the things that we need to be cutting on in terms of how we consume and what we consume? And certainly from there, look at opportunities that exist to at least save a little bit. But savings, Lizelle, to a large extent, is a behavioral thing, right?
Yes.
So Thabo,
actually,
it's just about starting somewhere, yeah?
Yeah, actually, let's speak to that. It's actually not even just solely related to income. There's cultural context in South Africa, education as well, capacity building, and institutional reasons. Could you help expand that a little bit further, given our realities?
Absolutely. The reality is we find ourselves in a state where we a nation of spenders more than a nation of savings. I mean, our levels of savings, at least the last published number, is 0.5% of household income is saved, which is a pittance compared to our peers in the developing economies. So we need to start developing a muscle to save, right? Looking at alternatives. And say, when do I start? And it's just a matter of starting. So it doesn't have to be a large sum of money that you need to save. It's just that little that I can save. And whether it's saving in a form of just cash or even other resources. How do we save on electricity? How do we save on water? How do we save on food? We are known to be the nation that throws away food in the midst of poverty. How do we live within our means as South African? I think it's the key thing. And how do we look at paying ourselves first? Paying ourselves first in terms of creating a culture of saving, creating a culture of saving for the inevitable, whether it's an emergency, whether it's things that we've planned. We have kids that we're going to take to school next year. Let's not pretend like we don't know that those kids need to go to school next year. But if you start putting aside a little bit and looking at how else can we save in terms of our daily living. To me, that makes much more sense in terms of things that we can control. There's things that we simply cannot control as South Africans. Let's look at those that we can control, and based on those that we can control, start living within our means.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, speaking to when a crisis hits or emergencies, I mean, this is obviously where one dips into that, and that's why it's become so pivotal now, so more than ever. We're obviously also about tools and capacity building. And yes, budgeting, it sounds like a good idea in theory when you can obviously confront what your behavior looks like. But for people living month to month, how do you suggest that they start? What budget methods do you recommend? Perhaps you could give us a crash course on that as we conclude.
Let's start there. Let's start with budgeting, because in some instances, in many instances, the genesis of us not being able to manage our finances start with that basic of budgeting. In some studies, we find that people do drop a budget, but they find it hard to stick to their budget. So if you go back and say, what are the plans? For instance, if we live in a household, what are the household plans for this year, for next year, right? And based on that, how are we going to finance those plans, and start drawing up a household budget and say, these are the things that we need in the household, and these are the other things that we might need. But let's start with the basic budgeting principles in terms of differentiating between things that we can do without, right? And I know it becomes difficult to have that conversation where you have to be honest with yourself and say, do I actually need this? And based on that, start identifying the opportunities to say, what are the tools that we can use? We have short-term savings products, right, in the market. We have mid-term and long-term savings products that we can use that are formalized. But do you also have ways to, for instance, informally create those groupings, right, that will help you save? Group shoppings, for instance, where we can get discounts. And out of those discounts, we are able to save, at least on things like groceries. So look at other means that you can use to at least create those savings opportunities, but convert those savings opportunities to save for things like rainy days, for in case of emergencies. But most importantly, for even the plans that we have. If we have plans for our households, identify those opportunities and create means to then save for that. Savings, to me, Lizelle, is more a behavioral thing more than anything else, because it doesn't have to be a lot of money that you're saving, but the little that you can start with, putting aside, that to me will be a good start. But begin with your budget. Begin with your the household discussions in Imbizo Yamali every month, to call your family in and say, what are the goals? What are the pressure points? What are we looking at in terms of our future plans? Therefore, are those covered in our budget? And if they are, what are the income streams that we need to realize? Do we start selling fruits? Do we start growing our own vegetables? Do we need to cut down on our expenses in terms of entertainment, etc., etc.? And out of that, you start creating budgets to suit your goals.
Yeah, Thabo, you're really reflecting on some pertinent points. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Of course, we'll see how that all plays out. But for now, let's leave our conversation. The Old Mutual Programs Manager, Thabo Hollo, breaking down the real cost of convenience, also just sharing some practical advice on how South Africans, no matter their income, can really take control of their financial future. And this obviously coming to the fore during July Savings Month.